The knife in the back always comes from the closest hand. They were the best of friends, so close that people joked they could read each other's minds. Marcus and Julian had built an empire together, a thriving business that turned them from nobodies into industry legends. They laughed together, celebrated wins, and trusted each other without question. But one evening, over an expensive dinner, Marcus made a mistake. He confided in Julian about an ambitious new deal, one that could change everything. Marcus said, "I just need a little more time," his voice full of excitement. Julian raised his glass and smiling, "Of course, my friend. I've got your back." Days later, Marcus received a call. The deal was gone, stolen, and the name behind the betrayal. Julian, how did this happen? How does someone go from your closest ally to your worst enemy? History whispers a brutal truth. Betrayal rarely comes from enemies. It comes from those we trust the most. The nature of friendship, a dangerous comfort. Friends make us feel safe. We assume they want what's best for us, that they will defend us at all costs. But this comfort blinds us. A friend knows your weaknesses, your secrets, your ambitions, and when power or money enters the picture, even the closest bonds can snap. Julius Caesar trusted Brutus. Napoleon relied on his officers. In the end, both were undone by those they once called friends. This is the lesson of the second law of power. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. And yet most people refuse to believe it. They think, "My friends would never do that to me." Marcus thought the same thing, until he was left with nothing. The darker alternative, an unexpected ally. But what if Marcus had placed his trust elsewhere? What if instead of relying on friendship, he had turned to someone with a different motivation, an enemy? It sounds insane, but history shows that an enemy can be more reliable than a friend. Why? Because an enemy has something to prove. They are calculated, cautious, and bound by necessity rather than blind loyalty. A former rival has already shown their strengths. And most importantly, they don't have the emotional baggage of betrayal. Marcus learned this lesson too late, but you don't have to. Marcus sat alone in his empty office, staring at the contract Julian had stolen from him. It was right there, in black and white, his former best friend's name signed where his should have been. Anger boiled inside him, but more than that, he felt like a fool. How could he have been so blind? How could someone who shared his dreams, his struggles, and his victories so easily turn against him? Then, a realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Julian never turned against him. Julian was simply looking out for himself. And Marcus, he had expected loyalty from friendship instead of from necessity. It was then he remembered an old saying, "A friend's loyalty is a choice. An enemy's cooperation is a strategy." Enemies have something to prove. Friends want to keep things comfortable. They agree too easily, nod along, tell you what you want to hear. They hide their ambitions under the mask of camaraderie. Enemies are different. Enemies have everything to prove. They are careful, they calculate every move, and most importantly, they cannot afford to betray you because their reputation depends on it. Take Abraham Lincoln, for example. When he became president, he did something shocking. He appointed his former rivals to his cabinet. Instead of fearing them, he used their ambition. He knew that people who once opposed him were now desperate to prove their worth. And they did, because an enemy who works for you has more to lose than a friend who takes you for granted. Marcus realized that Julian never had anything to lose by betraying him. But an enemy would have fought tooth and nail to keep Marcus on their side. Turning the tables. The unexpected ally. Determined not to make the same mistake twice, Marcus made a bold move. He called Darren. Darren was his old competitor, the man he once fought for clients, the man he had insulted in boardrooms. They were never friends, but they respected each other's power. And Darren, he had one reason to be loyal, because helping Marcus meant hurting Julian. Within weeks, Marcus and Darren struck a deal. They didn't trust each other, but they didn't have to, because their interests were aligned. And that's when Marcus truly understood the second law of power. A friend betrays out of comfort. An enemy stays loyal out of necessity. The shift in perspective. Most people think power is about trust. It's not. It's about control. Marcus lost because he assumed friendship guaranteed loyalty. But true power comes from knowing what motivates people and using it. And ironically, the most reliable people are often the ones you once called enemies. But there's still one question left to answer. How do you control an enemy without letting them control you? The illusion of trust. Marcus and Darren had struck a deal. Enemies turned allies, bound not by friendship but by strategy. It was a cold partnership, but it was working. Together, they clawed back the ground Marcus had lost. Julian was no longer untouchable, but Marcus knew one thing for certain. This alliance was not built on trust, and that was its greatest strength. Unlike his friendship with Julian, where he had assumed loyalty without question, his relationship with Darren was different. There were no illusions. This time, Marcus was prepared, and that made all the difference. How to use an enemy without being used. Most people make a fatal mistake when dealing with their enemies. They either trust them too much or they fear them too much. But Marcus had learned that true power lies in the balance. Enemies can be turned into assets, but only if you follow 3 unbreakable rules. Rule 1. Keep your enemy dependent on you. Power is not about friendship, it's about leverage. If your enemy needs you, they have no choice but to stay loyal. This is why Darren remained in Marcus's corner. Darren didn't help Marcus out of kindness. He did it because Marcus gave him something he couldn't get anywhere else. The deal they struck wasn't just about revenge against Julian. It was about opportunity. Marcus gave Darren access to new partnerships, new resources, a bigger game to play. And as long as Marcus controlled those opportunities, Darren had no reason to turn on him. History has proven this over and over. Take Cardinal Richelieu, the cunning advisor to King Louis XIII of France. He knew that controlling power wasn't about making friends, it was about making people need you. So he surrounded himself with former enemies, not allies. Why? Because an ally can leave whenever they want. An enemy who depends on you, they can't afford to. Rule 2. Keep them close but never comfortable. The moment an enemy turned ally feels too comfortable, they start looking for ways to outmaneuver you. Marcus knew that he could not repeat the mistake he made with Julian. With Julian, he was relaxed. He shared too much, trusted too blindly. With Darren, he played it differently. He never gave him full access to his plans. He kept him slightly uncertain about the future. He let Darren feel valuable but never irreplaceable. Think of Steve Jobs. When he returned to Apple, he didn't surround himself with old friends. He brought in people who had once doubted him, even opposed him. Why? Because keeping ambitious rivals close forces them to keep proving themselves. And the moment they think they're safe, you remind them they're not. Rule 3. Always have a knife sharper than theirs. This is the most dangerous rule but also the most important. Never believe that an enemy-turned ally has fully changed. They may work with you today, but if the circumstances change, they will turn on you tomorrow. So what do? You prepare. Marcus built a silent counterattack, a backup plan if Darren ever tried to betray him. He kept key deals in his name, he made sure to maintain relationships with Darren's other partners, and he quietly built an exit strategy. He didn't expect loyalty, he expected self-interest. And if Darren's self-interest ever turned against him, Marcus would be ready. It's the same strategy used by Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian statesman who unified Germany. He worked with his former enemies but always kept a political escape route, a hidden advantage, and leverage that could destroy them if they tried to turn. Because in the world of power, the moment you stop preparing for betrayal is the moment you lose. The final move, the test of true power. Months passed and Marcus's empire grew stronger. Julian, he was fading, but then the moment Marcus had anticipated finally arrived. Darren called him late one night. His voice was steady, but Marcus could hear it. The shift, the calculation. I've been thinking, Darren said. I think it's time we renegotiated our terms. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. Darren was testing the waters, looking for a crack, trying to tip the balance in his favor. Most people would panic, but Marcus, he was calm because while Darren had spent the last few months plotting his next move, Marcus had already made his. The next morning, before Darren could make his power play, Marcus executed his final move. He called Darren's own investors. He offered them a better deal. He cut Darren out before Darren could do the same to him. Darren never saw it coming, and just like that, the student became the master. The ultimate takeaway: power belongs to those who understand human nature. The biggest mistake people make is believing in permanent loyalty. They think friends will always be friends. They think enemies will always be enemies. They think the world operates on honor, trust, and mutual respect. But power belongs to those who see the truth. Friends can betray you because they assume you'll forgive them. Enemies can be controlled because they have something to prove. And the strongest people are not those who trust, but those who prepare. Marcus lost everything because he believed in friendship. He regained everything because he understood the game. Now the question is, do you? Subscribe to the channel for masterpiece summaries of masterpiece books. Not interested in useless things.